Hey guys, what is up? It is the Fast Break Report here, bringing you guys another vlog. I kind of want to talk about the Milwaukee Bucks firing Adrian Griffin because I have a lot of thoughts on this, and I honestly, one of the takes I know you guys aren't going to like, and that's perfectly fine. Even though I am a Pacers fan, I can be objective about things. I'm not blinded by the idea that, you know, I'm a fan of the team. You know, I try to be as objective as possible, but the Milwaukee Bucks have fired Adrian Griffin, and apparently their ideal candidate to replace him is Doc Rivers, of all people, who, by the way, hasn't done a fucking thing in the playoffs since that 08 Celtics team. Okay, like that's it. That's the pinnacle of his fucking career. And now I'm supposed to believe that Doc Rivers is going to come in and magically just fix the Milwaukee Bucks, okay? Like, he got fired from Philly. He got fired from the Clippers for underachieving. James Harden basically got Doc Rivers fired last year with the 76ers. So it's just the idea. I'm not sold on Doc Rivers. And I have a lot of thoughts on this because there's a lot of things I really didn't know also until yesterday. But the fact of the matter is, Adrian Griffin, I guess we'll start there, went 30-13 as their head coach, and they've had some bad losses. I'm going to call it what it is. You know, they actually had the second highest scoring offense of all time this season, only behind us, obviously. They had the second highest scoring offense of all time this year. The problem is, they've been basically a top 10, top 5 defense in every year prior since becoming a championship contending team. And this year they are ranked 21st in defense. And this is going to upset some people, but obviously the Pacers went 4-1 against the Milwaukee Bucks. I'm not saying we shouldn't win games against them. I'm simply saying there's no fucking reason we should win 4 games out of 5 against the Milwaukee Bucks, okay? Like, we're a good team offensively, but we're not that good defensively that we should be beating them 4-1, okay? Then last night against Detroit, they only beat them by 10 points. It was pretty obvious, like, they were struggling against Detroit. So finally, Milwaukee decided that Adrian Griffin is just not their guy. You know, before the season started, it seemed a little awkward that Terry Stotts just decided, like, I'm fucking done. Like, I don't want to be here. And that was like an immediate red flag. You know, like, I don't think anybody expected Terry Stotts to, like we all thought it was Damian Lillard. Like, I'm just going to keep it a buck. Like, that's what I thought it was. I think that's what every NBA fan thought it was, because Damian Lillard had just gotten traded there. And it seemed like right as Damian Lillard arrived, Terry Stotts was like, no. Like, I'm done. And from what I understand, Adrian Griffin lost the locker room too. And if it's one thing we know about Milwaukee, okay, if Giannis doesn't like you, they're siding with Giannis, okay? Like, they're not siding with Adrian Griffin, okay? Especially a head coach with no prior experience in the NBA. Granted, I will say this, for a guy of Adrian Griffin's caliber, you know, a first-year head coach to come in and still have, you know, the second highest win percentage in the NBA, with not having really any prior coaching experience, is impressive. I will say that. Like, it's an impressive mark. But the fact of the matter is, if you've been watching them since the beginning of the year, you'll know that defense fucking sucks. Okay? Like, I'm just going to call it what it is. Like, Milwaukee, defensively, had they kept Adrian Griffin, would not have a chance against the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals if they made it there. Okay? Like, their defense is fucking atrocious. Okay? So, and the idea that the Celtics got Jrue Holiday after the Milwaukee Bucks traded him to Portland, and then Portland traded him to Boston, like, it just, yeah, like, it was like a recipe for fucking disaster, okay? Now, I will say this, okay? What I don't understand about the Milwaukee Bucks is Mike Budenholzer was their head coach, okay? With him as a head coach, I thought they were doing fine with Mike Budenholzer there. I feel like they shouldn't have replaced him because I'm just going to be honest, last year's playoffs were kind of an anomaly, right? Like, how often is it that a play-in team makes the NBA Finals? It almost doesn't, it almost never happens. I would argue that it's probably never going to happen for another, like, a very long fucking time. I understand the NBA is very talented, but the odds of a play-in team getting to the NBA Finals, like, a lot of shit had to happen. And one of those things that had to happen against the Milwaukee Bucks was Giannis sat out a couple games, okay? Like, Giannis didn't play every game. You know, I didn't know this beforehand, but Mike Budenholzer's brother died in a car accident, like, I guess a couple weeks before that playoff series, the first round playoff series even began. So, like, you know, I was just thinking to myself, like, even when they fired Mike Budenholzer, I was originally like, okay, like, I don't know if I would have done that, but all right, you know, like, the Bucks are going in a different direction. The other thing I have to say about this also is the idea that, like, I don't think players should be choosing head coaches. Like, that's just my opinion, especially if you're gonna choose a coach on a guy you don't fucking know, right? Like, one of the dumbest things that I think front offices do is give star players the ability to help choose the head coach. Like, I'm just going to call it what it is. Like, I think that's, you know, it's a benefit, but it's also a mistake, right? Like, it's one thing to get the player's input on a head coach, but you don't just let the player choose the fucking coach. And I feel like that's what happened here. I think Giannis and Adrian Griffin initially had a good relationship, and as the season went on, you could tell it was starting to sour, right? Like, the players lost respect for him. Giannis was getting very argumentative with him, you know, at the scorer's table when he's checking into games and shit. You know, it was pretty obvious, though, that, like, the team had lost all faith in Adrian Griffin. It's obvious they weren't buying into anything that he was teaching or trying to teach. And the reason I say, like, stuff like this is a mistake is because a guy like Giannis, right? Like, Giannis is good at what he's good at, right? But, you know, and I'm not saying Giannis doesn't know anything about basketball. I'm not saying that at all. But it's just the idea, like, when coaches go in for interviews, like, do they explain the system that they plan to run? Or are we just doing interviews like, oh, okay, we like this guy, let's hire him? You know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like if you're going to be a head coach in the NBA and you're, you know, interviewing for a team position, like for a head coaching position, you should have to go in there and say, okay, this is the game plan. Right? Like, this is how I plan to utilize Giannis. This is how I plan to utilize Brook Lopez. This is how I plan to utilize Chris Middleton, right? These are the things. This is how I plan to utilize Damian Lillard. And by the way, Damian Lillard has been, I would say, one of the biggest reasons that Adrian Griffin got fired, because Damian Lillard's been a shell of himself this year. Like, I'm not going to lie, he's still having a really good year, but the fact of the matter is, like, Damian Lillard has not been the same guy. Like, he started off the year really rough, and, you know, I think Damian Lillard is capable of being better efficiency-wise. I think, actually, I know he's better, he's capable of being better efficiency-wise, but it's just the idea, like, they struggled to include a guy they just traded a whole shit ton of stuff for, right? They struggled to implement him. And I just think to myself, like, this should almost be a seamless fit, and it's clearly not. You know what I'm saying? Like, this should be one of those things where it's like, you let Damian Lillard bring the ball up the floor, and as soon as he gets doubled, you give it to Giannis, and if something, like, this should have been a team that was impossible to guard. And granted, they kind of were, okay? Second greatest offense of all time, only behind the Pacers this year. But it's just the idea, like, this is a team that should have been performing way better than it was. And, you know, I think to myself, like, honestly, like, if I'm the Bucks, I would say, like, you almost got to go grovel at Mike Budenholzer's feet and try to get him to come back. Because, honestly, Doc Rivers is not a guy that I think can get the car across the finish line. You know what I'm saying? Like, he'll get you to the big race. You know what I'm saying? Like, he'll get you in the playoffs. But when it comes to getting the car across the finish line, Doc Rivers is not the guy. Okay? And somehow, this guy just keeps getting fucking head coaching jobs. But then you have the flip side of the coin where they fire Adrian Griffin, hire Mike Budenholzer, and then it becomes a fucking race issue. All right, but it's just the idea that defense sucked more dick than a Filipino hooker this year. Okay, it was fucking terrible. And if you're the Milwaukee Bucks, your defense cannot be ranked 21st in the NBA. And granted, it was getting a little bit better as time went on. I mean, they kind of hit a wall these past 10 games. But it's just the idea, like, if you're the Bucks and you're looking to compete with the Celtics for an NBA championship and every other fucking team you're gonna have to play, you cannot be ranked 21st in the NBA in defense. Like, if you want a gambler's shot at winning an NBA championship, you can't be ranked any lower than 15th, okay? I would even argue you can't be ranked any lower than 12th. Like, you gotta be a team that's kind of like in the top 10 or near the top 10 in defense, because in playoffs, that's when it matters. That's when defense matters. Fuck the offense, okay? Playoffs is all half-court offense and defense, okay? That's all the playoffs are. And if you're not good at those two things, you're not going to win. So the idea that they brought in Doc Rivers, I'm like, okay, cool, okay, let's see what happens. Granted, I could be wrong. You know, for all I know, this is probably the best team that Doc Rivers has ever coached since the 08 Celtics. But it's just the idea, like, being that he couldn't get it done with the Clippers and he couldn't get it done with the Sixers, I just think to myself, man, like, I really don't know how this is going to go. Granted, he hasn't had a duo like Damian Lillard and Giannis, since it depends if we really want to put Harden in that conversation, but I don't think he's really ever had two players this skilled on the same team at one time. Harden was good, but when Doc Rivers got Harden, it was like he had lost a step. Harden seems like he's kind of reviving his career in LA a little bit, but I don't know, man. I really think they shouldn't have fired Mike Budenholzer. I'm actually shocked that Giannis let them fire Mike Budenholzer because of everything. Like, Mad Dog put it, like, I think the best on ESPN, and very rarely do I ever, like, take anything from Mad Dog, but the idea that Mike Budenholzer's brother died, like, a couple weeks before that playoff series, and then the idea that your best fucking player didn't play in that first playoff series that much, like, the idea that they fired Mike Budenholzer, we're like, okay, we got to go in a different direction. It feels like at certain times teams just trade head coaches just for, shits and giggles. But, like, if you look at the Spurs, right, they have Greg Popovich, and they've kept Greg Popovich for as long as I've been alive, it seems, right? And yes, like, there's a certain point where, obviously, you need certain talent around you in order to win. It's not just an idea that you bring in a coach and suddenly your team starts fucking winning. Part of it is talent. But, the Spurs, even through the bad years, have stuck with Greg Popovich, and what is happening? It is starting to show signs of being a potential good team in the future. Granted, I don't know how many years Greg Popovich has left coaching, but it's just the idea, like, they have Victor Wembanyama, they have Keldon Johnson, they have Devin Vassell, who's become very good. I think Blake Wesley is incredibly underrated. I like Malachi Branham. Granted, I've kind of given up on Jeremy Sohan, but it's just the idea, like, they're a team with young talent, and so long as Greg Popovich is there and they keep that coaching staff there, they're going to be a team that can develop young players and will at some point be competitive again, right? Like, it's just the idea, like, I think this niche that you fire coaches after one or two bad seasons is kind of overblown. Like, I'll never forget the time that Dwayne Casey got fired for being coach of the fucking year. Okay, that's the shit I'm talking about. Like, front offices sometimes I feel like just fire head coaches to fire head coaches. And sometimes I just think to myself, like, it doesn't make any sense. And the Mike Budenholzer firing was one, to me, that didn't make any sense. Miami has stuck with Eric Spoelstra through the good and the bad. I mean, like, in 2010, I think the Miami Heat only won, like, 19 games or some shit like that, or was it 08, 09? Like, even when they had a 19 and 63 win season or some crazy shit like that, they still kept Eric Spoelstra, right? The Spurs, they still kept Greg Popovich, right? I mean, look at all the years the Lakers kept Phil Jackson. You know, it's just the idea, like the Chicago Bulls. Like, it's just the idea when you have a good coach, okay, most of the time, it's not the coach. You know what I'm saying? A lot of the time, it's the personnel. But when you change your head coach and you keep your personnel and suddenly you're not a good winning team anymore, like, or you just absolutely fall off in one category, you shouldn't have fired the head coach. That's all I'm saying. So, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see how this all plays out, but it's just the idea, like, I kind of can't believe they fired Mike Budenholzer in the first place. They brought in a head coach with no fucking prior coaching experience, which is even more mind-blowing to me. I'm like, you replaced Mike Budenholzer with a guy who hasn't coached a single game in the fucking NBA and expected this to go better? You know, like, so, I don't know, man. We'll have to wait and see what happens, but tell me what you guys think about this down below in the comment section below. A like helps me out. Subscribe if you guys want to see more on the Fast Break Report, and I'm out of this motherfucker. Peace, guys.